Good morning, you're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is in Warsaw today. This visit follows Hegseth attending a meeting of NATO defense ministers earlier this week. Our reporter Paweł Trzaskowski is on site. Good morning, Paweł. So what can we expect from today's meeting?
Well, the meeting between the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and the Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz is being held as we speak. It's a closed meeting that is supposed to last for over an hour. And after this meeting, there will be a press conference that we will be attending. And during this press conference, I hope we'll be able to ask some questions, because there are a lot of questions that follow Pete Hegseth's visit to the NATO defense ministers meeting, a visit that had some strong statements from the U.S. Secretary of Defense. During this visit, Hegseth said that NATO is a great alliance, possibly the best defense alliance in history. However, for it to endure, Europe needs to take its security in its own hands. And he gave Poland as a model, as an example for all other NATO countries in Europe, as Poland is planning to spend close to 5% of its GDP on defense, 5% that is expected to become the new NATO threshold. Back to you.
Thank you so much. That was Paweł Trzaskowski reporting from Warsaw. World leaders are gathering in Munich for the city's annual high-powered security conference as U.S. President Donald Trump pushes for a peace deal in Ukraine. Trump's second-in-command, J.D. Vance, is in Germany alongside Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Damon, is there and joins us now. Good morning, Aaron. So what's the mood on the ground and what can we expect of today?
Good morning, Claudia. Well, van after van, car after car of high-powered, high-stakes leaders are arriving behind me, and it's almost showtime here in Munich. The snow is coming down, it's cold, security is all over this city. The energy, the tension is ramped well up in Munich. We've just seen the agenda for the first time as well, and it is packed. About 60 heads of states and a laundry list of leaders from all around the world will be here for these talks. And of course, the talks that everyone is interested in, that everyone has their eye on, are those Ukraine peace negotiations. What could they look like? J.D. Vance will address the conference this afternoon. Volodymyr Zelensky will appear on a panel this afternoon, then give a speech tomorrow morning. Now, those two, they're expected to meet today alongside Ukraine envoy Keith Kellogg, who overnight suggested to local media that Zelensky and Vladimir Putin should sit down face to face. Look, President Zelensky will be aiming to tell the US, stick with us, keep supporting us, and keep us in mind when you're having these conversations with Russia. Opening a direct line to Vladimir Putin, as Donald Trump did this week, was certainly not on Volodymyr Zelensky's wish list, but that is the reality that he is dealing with, and it is the reality with which he will go into this meeting with J.D. Vance today. All of it. The conference will kick off at 1:30, and a weekend of power plays, of politics, awaits. Claudia?
Thank you so much. That was TVP World's chief political correspondent Aaron Damon reporting from Munich, where the security conference is about to begin. When asked whether he'd compare the Munich Security Conference to the meeting in Yalta, which cemented the Soviet Union's sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said Ukraine, unlike countries from the past, is both fighting back and has its allies by its side.
Please be careful making historical analogies. We are talking with our allies, having realistic talks, and we're talking with Ukraine, because Ukraine was also present yesterday in Paris. Unlike in the past, this attacked country is fighting back, has agency, and has allies.
German opposition leader Friedrich Merz has said that he expects a tough confrontational speech from U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference, adding that he hopes Europe is prepared to respond. Merz said Europe will likely need to strengthen support for Ukraine or risk losing it to Russia.
I've had some early indications of how Vice President J.D. Vance will be speaking. It will be a confrontational speech, and I very much hope that the Chancellor is prepared, also in coordination with his partners in the European Union, to give a European, not a German, but a European answer. We will remember this security conference in 2025 for a very long time, and it will have consequences. Nevertheless, we are still in the middle of this conflict. We are still faced with the question, how do we help Ukraine? And I predict that starting this weekend, we will have to answer this question even more clearly. And if we don't do that, then we will give up Ukraine, and that won't make Putin stop.
U.S. President Donald Trump has said that EU and NATO countries must increase their financial contributions to support Ukraine. He also claimed that the U.S. is bearing a financial burden of $200 billion more than Ukraine's other allies, and that these countries need to equalize payments. Trump's statement follows his call with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
We want to have them put up more money. They have to do that. At the same time, we had a very good conversation with President Putin yesterday, and we also had a very good conversation. I did in both cases with President Zelensky, and I think we're going to be able to do something. I think we're going to be able to make a deal. But as far as the negotiation, it's too early to say what's going to happen. Maybe Russia will give up a lot, maybe they won't, and it's all dependent on what is going to happen. The negotiation really hasn't started.
On Thursday, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said that America would hit Moscow with sanctions should Vladimir Putin not agree to a peace deal with Ukraine. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Vance floated the idea of sending American troops to Ukraine if Moscow fails to negotiate in good faith.
Vance struck a far tougher tone than his colleague US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who suggested that the US will not commit its military to ensure peace in Ukraine. In the interview, the Vice President claimed that the US has economic tools of leverage and will use its military tools if the situation demands it. J.D. Vance's remarks came a day before his meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky at the Munich Security Conference. The American Vice President is also scheduled to speak with Allied leaders, whom he intends to tell that they are stifling free speech and democracy by not working with populist parties.
Speaking to the Financial Times, Emmanuel Macron has said that only the Ukrainian president can negotiate on behalf of his country with Russia. The French leader went on to say that a peace that is capitulation would be bad news for everyone, the US included.
In the interview, Macron asked whether Vladimir Putin is genuinely, sustainably and credibly interested in a ceasefire deal, and added that if he is, then it is up to the Ukrainians to negotiate with the Kremlin. These remarks come after US President Donald Trump separately discussed the war with Russian and Ukrainian officials and told his administration to open talks on ending the conflict. The phone calls followed US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth telling Ukraine's allies that return to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders was unrealistic, and he does not see it as part of NATO in the coming future. Additionally, Macron told the Financial Times that Donald Trump had created a window of opportunity for a negotiated solution to the war, and at the same time, the French leader said it is now up to Volodymyr Zelensky to discuss territorial and sovereignty issues.
The Russian army struck the Chernobyl power plant with an attack drone on Thursday night. The high-explosive warhead hit the containment unit covering up reactor 4 of the plant. This is the same reactor which exploded in 1986, causing the largest radiological incident in history. In a statement on X, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wrote that the reactor cover was damaged by the attack. The strike sparked a fire which had to be extinguished by Ukrainian fire crews. Radiation levels are currently stable and are being constantly monitored. According to an initial assessment of the situation, the damage to the protective shell around reactor 4 is significant. Alexander Vinnik, a Russian national convicted of cybercrime, has been released by the United States as part of a prisoner swap. According to the Russian state news agency, Vinnik arrived in Moscow late on Thursday and thanked Vladimir Putin for arranging the exchange. After being freed from prison, Winnik boarded a U.S. Air Force aircraft which took him through Poland to the Vnukovo airport in Moscow. The Russian national pleaded guilty to charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering in May of 2024. He operated a cryptocurrency exchange through which he was suspected of funneling some $4 billion in proceeds from, among others, ransomware attacks. He was freed by the U.S. from prison after Moscow released American schoolteacher Mark Fogel. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has warned Europe against treating America like a sucker while speaking to reporters at the NATO headquarters in Brussels. Hegseth said that Trump administration is expecting Europe to take primary responsibility for defense on the European continent.
We can talk all we want about values. Values are important. But you can't shoot values. You can't shoot flags. And you can't shoot strong speeches. There is no replacement for hard power. As much as we may not want to like the world we live in some cases, there's nothing like hard power. We have the perfect deal maker at the table from a position of strength to deal with both Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. No one's going to get everything that they want. Understanding who committed the aggression in the first place. But I challenge anyone else to think of a world leader at this moment who, with credibility and strength, could bring those two leaders to the table and forge a durable peace that ultimately serves the interests of Ukraine, stops the killing and the death, which Trump has been clear he wants to do, and hopefully ultimately is guaranteed by strength of Europeans who are there prepared to back it up.
We need to work together in Europe and achieve common results, Volodymyr Zelensky said ahead of the Munich Security Conference in Germany. The Ukrainian president added that he has spoken to the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine about strengthening Ukraine's air force.
We are now preparing for meetings and negotiations at the Munich conference, and on the road, I just spoke with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda. We are coordinating our positions, a joint European defense. This is extremely important, to work together in Europe and achieve common results. I also spoke with the Commander-in-Chief, Alexander Syrsky. We need to strengthen our Air Force, specifically the aviation component, our military aviation. I have instructed the Commander-in-Chief to discuss with Brigadier General Serhiy Holubstov and report on the possibility of corresponding personnel changes in the Air Force, including considering the appointment of Brigadier General Holubstov as Deputy Commander of the Air Force.
It seems like the people of Ukraine did not take too well to Donald Trump's idea of peace negotiations with Russia without Volodymyr Zelensky present. Zarina Zabriskie, a Ukrainian journalist, spoke to civilians and soldiers who are equally disgusted with the idea of negotiations without the involvement of Ukrainian officials.
I interviewed quite a lot of Ukrainians today all around the country. I make a point of speaking to people in different life paths and in different regions, anywhere from Donetsk and Kharkov to all the way in south and in western Ukraine. And pretty much everybody describes this deal as a dirty one, exactly the same words. There's a lot of anger, outrage. I spoke to several militaries, an officer. The emotions range from being in shock to being disgusted. And there's certainly no readiness in Ukraine to accept whatever is going to be brought or imposed on Ukraine in such a manner.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has called on political leaders in Poland to put aside their differences when discussing matters of national security, especially in light of the war and potential peace in Ukraine. In a social media post, the Polish Prime Minister said that Poland, Europe, and the broader West need cooperation and solidarity in the wake of U.S. President Donald Trump announcing the commencement of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. Disagreements about the war and potential peace in Ukraine will have to be put on hold, Tusk said, arguing there's no place for discord in the face of threats coming from Russia. Donald Trump, after talking to the leaders of both Ukraine and Russia, said Moscow and Kyiv want to reach a peaceful agreement. And so this marks the end of our news broadcast, but please do stay tuned. We're back here on TVP World in just a moment with more interviews and features.